Hey folks, I'm Sile. I'm one of the co-founders at MetaView. Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. Incredibly excited to have you here. We're going to be exploring a topic that is really at the forefront of every recruiter and recruiting leader's mind at the moment, certainly in the conversations that I'm having with them, which is essentially around how do you keep recruiting human? How do you make sure it's still a relationship-driven part of your business in the era of AI? So why this topic and why now? Clearly, AI is rapidly bringing about a new frontier in how work gets done. And at MetaView, we look at this in really two ways. One is how can AI be leveraged to turbocharge individual and group productivity like never before? And secondly, how can or will AI be leveraged to help humans make better, more informed decisions and judgments? So those are the two buckets that we look at. We're running this event and a series of other events that are going to follow because the next few months and years are going to be all about working out what this actually means in practice, right? The outcomes we care about aren't really going to change. We're still going to care about high velocity, high quality hiring, but how we go about it, the tactics and the tools at our disposal are going to change, potentially in a revolutionary way. So even though right now we think we have some pretty good answers to how we're going to enable this higher velocity, higher quality, in our case, interviewing through providing AI generated summaries of interviews so people don't have to write notes themselves, there's certainly plenty more to come. And it's really what we spend all day and all evening thinking about here at MetaView. So today, really delighted to be talking to Richard Cho and Wesley Gilbert. Richard Cho has led recruiting at Gem. And before that, he was at Robinhood, Dropbox, Facebook, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. If there's such thing as recruiting royalty, Cho is in the family. Wesley is the global head of talent acquisition at On, the sportswear brand that has gone from sort of plucky startup to public company in just a handful of years. Before that, Wesley was at companies like Uber, which is actually where him and I first met and got to know each other, and Google. Both Richard and Wesley have exposure to MetaView as customers, as well as a wealth of experience to fall back on as we chew on this topic. So we'll jump in really soon, but before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, obviously we've got some terrific guests, but we also have some terrific attendees. So these recruiters, recruiting leaders from some of the most forward-thinking companies in the world. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you have a question, please just add it to the Q&A section in Zoom, and then one of the MetaView team will pick that up. Obviously, please try and keep the questions relevant to the topic. It's all about how AI may, could, should impact recruiting and what we need to do as operators and leaders to make sure it serves our goals, to serve our business goals, and our candidates. So enough from me. Let's get started. First of all, why don't we kick off with you, Richard? Obviously, I think you both have really interesting journeys into TA. So just as a bit of a headline, maybe a quick intro, along with, tell us a little bit about your journey that landed you where you are today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate having any kind of introduction that uses an example that I'm part of some sort of royalty. The only similarities is I'm really old. I've been doing this for a long time. So speaking of which, I fell into recruiting like most other people. No one, unfortunately, no one actually goes to school and thinks about I want to go into talent acquisition. And I think we're doing a good job as TA professionals to really create that as a real professional path. But I fell into recruiting. I went to school to be an engineer. And what I felt that was missing was there has to be a logical way to be more predictive in hiring. And I was put to the test, if you will, when asked to help scale companies like Facebook from 500 to 6,000, Dropbox from 500 to 1,200, and then the most aggressive hiring was at Robinhood from less than 400, so 390 to 4,400 in less than 3 years. And what that required was the ability to be able to think about talent acquisition in a logical way while still maintaining some of the things that continue to drive relationship-based recruiting. So that's who I am. I'm kind of an engineer that thinks about recruiting 24/7 and how we can do it much better.
Nice. Cheers, Richard. And same to you, Wesley. Yeah, quick intro and just tell us a little bit about your journey, which is is exciting.
Yeah, thanks. And it's a bit of a long story, so I'll try and give you the very short and sweet version. Similar to Richard, I think people can come into and fall in love and discover recruiting in different ways. I actually have almost lived two completely different lives so far in my career, because I actually graduated as an actor, and I spent 6 years doing that. And alongside that, I was running an events company that specialized in experiential marketing. And I started to kind of fall out of love with that industry. And I was looking around for something else to kind of capture my attention. And I actually met someone through my network who worked as a recruiter at Google at the time. And he told me about the passion that he had for it, and really made it sound incredibly exciting, and asked me if it was something that I would want to interview for. And so he very kindly got me an interview at Google, and I was lucky enough to get the job. And that was my first experience of recruitment. And I think what I realized very quickly is Google was a great place to come in and learn some best practices and some foundations. It's a huge organization. They do things very well, but it was also a place where everything was defined and everything was built. And I realized very quickly that creating and building and innovating in this space is where the fun happens, where the magic happens. And I was lucky enough to get approached by somebody at Uber. And effectively, they were on a much earlier point in their journey at that point. They were around 2,500 people. And we ended up scaling from that point when I joined to 25,000 people over the space of 4 years. It was the fastest any company had ever grown at that scale. And so it was just a phenomenal place to come in and do what I was passionate about, because when we started, I worked under a very inspirational leader, someone who was really looking to come at talent acquisition at a very different angle. He didn't have a background in talent acquisition, Nicolas Buteau. And he would challenge us to say, okay, we're solving these problems. So this is the problem we want to solve. Let's figure out a creative way to get there. And you don't have to do things the trodden path. And so we were building everything from candidate experience and coordination programs to the approach to sourcing to end-to-end recruitment. It was all about, hey, let's challenge ourselves and do things differently. And so I was lucky enough to get to wear a phenomenal number of hats and explore a ton of different roles and everything within TA and even employer branding also. So I've had a very unique zigzaggy career path across all over the different elements, but I think it's given me a bit of a unique perspective on what matters in recruitment and how you can do it in a really interesting way. So I've taken a lot of that with me to On, and we've scaled here very quickly as well, from about 350 to just under 2,000 people in 3 years. So it's been a great journey here as well.
Amazing stuff. And so the way we're going to structure the conversation is, firstly, we want to set the foundations of what do we mean when we talk about relationship-based or relationship-driven recruiting, and then we're going to dive into some of the ways that technology and AI might be able to impact that. So I guess to kick off, Richard, you wrote a piece maybe a year ago or so, I think, in reaction to sort of the broader economic climate that really sort of was a bit of a homage to this relationship-driven recruiting. What is relationship-based recruiting for you?
Over the last, let's call it 15, 20 years, what's happened is that we've had a lot of systems and tools that allow for the want of a better word, create candidates as a commodity. I think back when I first fell into recruiting in 1998, where it took a better part of 2 weeks to generate a slate of candidates, maybe 5 people in the slate of candidates. And in that time, you spent a lot of your time building trust and getting to know each one of your candidates. And so you treated each of those candidates as someone that you invested a lot of time in. Fast forward to today, you could push a button and come up with 100 qualified names, and it's just a matter of sifting through keywords. And in many cases, companies are using machines to sift through keywords, and then you just kind of spray and pray. You just kind of say, "Hey, are you looking for a job? Great. Let me usher you through this hiring process." And at the end of it, you're negotiating life-changing terms like compensation or title, and you're wondering why compensation has exponentially gone sort of beyond what the market is saying it should be, right? So really at the heart of it, relationship-based recruiting just means to arm your staff with enough time and space to be able to build a trusting relationship, one that's mutually beneficial, meaning it's beneficial to the company to bring in a highly qualified individual, but also it's mutually benefiting to the candidate, where that person, she or he, can have the opportunity to have a career path that they deserve. So that requires a lot of removing the mundane, pushing buttons, and giving the opportunity to be able to spend that time to do so. And that's really at the heart of what relationship-based recruiting is.
That's awesome. Wesley, what about your perspective? Same question. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think, Richard makes a ton of great points. The reality is that there is a bit of a war for talent out there, certainly in certain functions, and great talent has a lot of options, right? And they have the ability to pick and choose where they want to spend their time. And as Richard said, once you make these decisions, these are life-changing decisions, and you really have to find a company that aligns with you and your personal values and the way you see your career and your development, that they're going to really support you on that journey. And so I try to feel like we need to create an environment when we're bringing people into the organization that we're really going to get to know someone deeply. We're really going to understand what makes them tick, because I think on both sides, you can self-select out because you identify, hey, this is an environment that works in this way. And we're very autonomous. Some people love that. They thrive in that environment. Others are like, hey, actually, I need more stability. I need more structure in terms of how I work. So as we move more towards skills-based hiring over the long term, of kind of how I see it, of these moments where you can identify what skills you need, really getting to know somebody on a longer term, you can really understand, okay, this is what this person can bring to the organization. This is where they're going to add value. And I think it just gives you that longer term view on the talent market, where you can be a bit more of a predictive hiring organization. You can say, okay, we already know what roles are going to come in the future, but rather than having to react to that in the moment, you've already started to build relationships with talent in the market. You've already started to connect with them, show them what you're about, show them your values, and likewise learn from them. And so hopefully over that time, once you get to the point where you're ready to open a role, you're ready to make a move, you already have hopefully relationships built in a number of areas that are going to lead to great talent wanting to be a part of your organization, and hopefully elevating your company to be the place that they want to be, because they've got to know you over that long term, and they also see that you're investing in them and that you value them. So I think it's this kind of both sides trying to build that relationship and really identify as the right move.
Yeah. And Richard, you spoke a little bit about sort of some of the ways you go about sort of enabling teams to do this, essentially like removing the rote, the mundane, that sort of thing from their plate. Are there sort of like any other tactics you've seen work really well to operationalize that? And how do you check in on these behaviors? The needles and the dials must be harder to sort of like to observe when you're thinking about how good are you at building relationships?
Yeah, you definitely have to put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter, the sourcer, and the coordinator. There are ways in which relationship is built from the very beginning, and every single person across the TA team has, especially those that have the ability to have some sort of interface with the candidate. We need to operationalize the notion of like, how do we end up treating this candidate the way we want to be treated? Do we want sort of a boilerplate template about preparation for an interview, or do we want something more customized? Do we want sourcers to reach out with the depth of experience, like understanding the depth of experience of that candidate, so it's more customized to that individual? Or do we want them to just send boilerplate reach out emails? And So all of those things require some sort of tool or system or policy to be able to drive, the more sort of customized relationship-based approach. And various tools play a role in that. Yeah. With that said, you also have to spend time educating the team as well. It's one thing to provide this system and tools. It's another to be able to enable them to really think about not thinking about recruiting as an operational task or a tactical task, but that it's it's of strategic importance. And many companies have already figured out how to do that. If you think about like sales forces in every organization, the sales force has had a couple of decades head start in enabling their sales force to make sure that they continue to create relationship-based connections. And you just apply a very similar tactic to recruiting. And to your final question about how do you measure this, every organization that I've been a part of, we send out a survey, and we ask for the simple NPS question that everyone asks, which is, would you recommend this company as an employer of choice? In a much more eloquent way. I'm saying it very rigidly, and that's important because we don't just send those out to candidates who got the job because they're excited and they're happy, and they're more than likely going to say, I really loved my experience, and I highly recommend the company. But we also send it to people who didn't get the job, whether they rejected us or we rejected them, because that's where we can see value in where we can improve in our relationship. And you'll know very, very quickly whether or not you are a very tactical, rigid, very cold, TA process, or you have a TA process that was very humane and treated that particular candidate with such respect that even if they didn't get the job, they would recommend others to the organization. So that's a way to measure that.
Yeah, that definitely sort of jives with what I've seen as well, where I think you have this heartbeat metric, which is, well, what a candidate's telling us, which, and especially when you're at scale, that's really valuable data. And then there's this other, but I do think there's these anecdotal or sort of less predictable moments where if you as a recruiter, you have generated this relationship with a candidate, you've honestly consulted that they weren't the right person for a certain role at a certain time, but then this new role comes up and they're clearly the perfect person. And actually that hire can be made incredibly quickly because, you've got them at your top of your address book and they know who you are and they've been waiting to join you too. So I think there are these sort of occasional, just like really magical hires that you make when you take that approach as well, at least that from my experience. You've both spoken about, sorry, go ahead, Wesley.
I was just going to add, I think it's an interesting thing with what you were touching on at the beginning with all these AI and automation tools that are coming in. The reality is that, I've said to my team a few times, if you don't want to be replaced by a robot, don't work like a robot, right? So there are so many elements of your job that can be automated. And if those are where you're spending 90% of your time, then 5 years from now, what you're bringing into the value to your organization will be gone. But if you can elevate yourself by doing these things that we're talking about and building relationships, helping to prepare candidates, really kind of embedding yourself in your teams, getting to know them, learning what they need, then you're not so easy to replicate with a piece of AI.
Yeah. Wesley, do we have the right to steal that phrase?
please help yourself.
Good. You've both spoken about the importance of like essentially long-term recruiting, like not so transactional, not so commoditized recruiting sort of strategies that build this resonance and relationship, and I think maybe like presence over time. Wesley, I heard you speak recently about sort of taking some of that thinking, that first principles thinking around sort of creating this presence, I guess, to sourcing and taking a more strategic approach as opposed to a transactional one. Could you just tell us a little bit more about the paradigm shift that either you've been a part of or you think is needed in more of the industry from a sourcing perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sourcing, obviously, it varies drastically company to company, but I think it's about this paradigm shift is about really redefining what the role is and setting a North Star or a new vision for where the individuals within that function can extend their impact and their value. And so, you know, a lot of companies just think about it as, hey, we want to increase the volume of CVs that are getting reviewed or the number of candidates that are coming into our process. It's all about, you know, just that pipeline building. And I think if you make the role that transactional, then you are going to attract a particular type of talent that is also going to treat that role in a transactional manner, and ultimately really have it as a stepping stone and a move for something else. It's just like, I need to tick this box, I need to get this on my CV, and then I can move on to something bigger and better. And I think that's a huge mistake for how companies define the role, because what we try to do it on is attract a different type of talent, whether it's a new graduate or someone that's super seasoned in sourcing, by saying to them, we're going to give you complete channel ownership, right? So you look at the full landscape of the on picture. Let's have a look across those different channel pieces where you can have a longer term strategic impact on the business. So from an outbound perspective, that means, hey, you're going to become the market intelligence expert. So you're working with your recruitment teams and your business teams to analyze and look at everything that's happening in that market, everything that's happening in that space, doing that long-term relationship building with passive candidates, increasing our brand positioning in the market, you know, really showing up as the expert in the room. Then you look at your inbound channels and say, okay, what recruitment marketing do we need within your space that's going to help to drive higher quality applications? What is the event strategy that you're building around this function? How are you going to increase the quality or the diversity of the individuals that are proactively coming to our organization, to ON? And then you look at referrals and say, okay, what can you do to define referrals campaigns or strategies that are going to, again, increase our network reach and create a culture of referrals within the organization? And I think if you utilize all of these above, and then you can also say you're responsible for building connections with underrepresented groups, our connection with societies or communities in that space that are going to open door to that talent, again, wanting to interact with us. You're giving them a North Star vision where you're saying, actually, you have an opportunity to influence all of these channels. This is what your role is. It's not just about getting me a CV today, but it's about that long-term 5-year plan of, we need to increase the quality of the people that are coming to speak to us and the diversity. We need to have a really good idea of what is happening in the market. You're setting this person's role up to be hyper strategic, hyper value driven. That's going to get a completely different level of talent wanting to work in that space for a start, that will give a higher quality of value to the organization. But I think it also just redefines the role to be much bigger and much more impactful. And I think that is, for me, the key paradigm shift that needs to happen, because otherwise, yeah, you can just outsource to a call center somewhere, someone that's just going to review CVs and send me 50 profiles, right? Where's the value in that? I want somebody who really understands the business and is trying to do really interesting and innovative things to increase the quality of the talent that we get.
Nice.
You know, I couldn't agree more, Wesley. It's just, you hit on a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I stumbled upon it just myself, in that, you know, I went to school to be an engineer, you know, decided I was a poor engineer, a much better friend to engineers. But what I didn't appreciate, or I underappreciated, was that it made me credible to have conversations with hiring managers, with engineers, to a point where, as you're mastering your craft as a talent acquisition professional that deeply understands a particular area, you are able to become that strategic advisor to hiring managers, which then allows you then to your point, be better market advisors. You know, you can talk about where other sources of talent could come from, and that's where the power of being able to convince that the same biased pipelines are always going to produce the same biased outcomes. Here are some other ways, based on your own credibility, where you can really shift that paradigm of only the top 10 schools in the world produce the best engineers in the world. So what you're saying resonates really well, and it really elevates that our profession as true strategic advisors. So I just wanted to second what you said, because that was brilliant.
Nice. last question, and then we're going to move on to, before we move on to sort of the role of AI. And I think like one thing that's like coming across super clearly right now is none of these things are like, hey, you know, apply AI to that problem solved. Nothing we're hearing so far sort of fits that sort of characterization at the moment. So we're going to get on to that in a second. But last question, and then maybe come to you first, Richard. Obviously, you've been sort of thinking about and cultivating and nurturing this approach at some sort of amazing companies over the last few years. Did you ever sort of have, when it comes to creating this culture around taking a relationship-based approach to recruiting, obviously a lot of pressure from management to hit numbers from a hiring perspective as well. Did you ever have any sort of situations where you had to sort of convince, whether it's upwards or horizontally, that this is the right way to go? And if so, how did you go about getting people on side with this approach?
Yeah, you know, when you instrument your pipeline with the data that actually shows the impact of any kind of experiment, where it's relationship-based recruiting, whether it's diversifying the pipeline and using data to counter the misnomer that it slows down your hiring process, you're able to make more convincing arguments. So it really starts with making sure that you've instrumented your your entire hiring pipeline, the funnel, in a way where you can extract data. So with that said, there are two, if we were to just sort of, give a general summarization, there are two inputs into, the speed of hiring. Obviously, it's the quality of the pipeline and how they convert at each stage, but also the second is where they're coming from. And this spans the gamut from university to highly experienced, and to what Wesley said earlier around what about some of the events that might produce really good connections to highly experienced candidates. So when you're able to show, here's sort of the tactical way, using Wesley's term, how a robot would be able to just pick keywords and submit candidates on your behalf, versus here's the set of criteria using certain number of resources that is based on relationship based, and you use A/B test. What you'll find is not only do you have better throughput, but it takes less candidates to get through a successful offer. So what might look like less volume at the very top end actually ends up becoming more efficient output on the bottom of that particular funnel. And you can't convince people overnight, because they're going to just say like, wait, why are we spending so much time? I'm not getting 15 candidates a week like I used to. What gives? You need to convince that quality over quantity wins more often than not. And at the same time, when we talk about quality, you're also producing candidates that are much better at being bought into the mission of the company versus, hey, this is a hot company. This is the offer we're going to make you. Oh, we have to give you more compensation to really lock you in. We don't know if you're loyal to the company or you're buying into the mission, but we're just kind of transacting the way we can. So that's a long way of me saying, like, every organization that I've been a part of, you have to instrument the data to show proof of relationship-based recruiting has better output.
Yeah, which I think is a really great point, because I think people can often sort of, what we wouldn't want out of this discussion, or just like from anyone sort of thinking about this approach, is you wouldn't want to conflate relationship-based recruiting with numbers don't matter. Like, it's not the same thing. It's still a means. It's a means to achieve the goal, which is a high number of great people, great talent density in your company. So yeah, sorry, were you going to add something, Wesley?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think another piece on top of what Richard's talking about with the influencing data is, I always kind of view hiring with the teams as it's a partnership to be done well, and so there's an element of, obviously you show your value, that this is not transactional work, and that all the things that are happening in the background have phenomenal impact. I think what helps me sometimes influencing the teams is kind of two elements. One is high quality hires take time, and especially when you're focused on diversity, and so when we talk about what we're trying to do for them, the ultimate goal is we both want the same things. We want to hire incredible people that are going to come in and add value. And I think even if you are lucky enough to work in a company where you've never experienced, bad teammates, even if you think back to school and kind of working on projects, and you had someone that maybe wasn't pulling their weight, or someone that had a bad attitude, and how quickly that spirals through the group and can have a massive impact. And I think the impact of low performing teams is something that is exponential, right? So when we hire somebody who is a great performer and a really strong addition to the team, that actually raises the whole bar of the team. And so there's an element of just saying, hey, if we can do this, the impact it's going to have on you as a leader, the less work that you're going to have to do coaching, developing, and maybe even offboarding individuals, that we're getting these hires right straight off the gate and we're not having to replace, is massive. And then I think the second part is just trying to talk their language, right? So we're a product company. So when I talk to the teams here, I talk a lot about the hiring being this process, right, that we go through. And we think, if you think about it to them, I kind of translate it and say like, hey, we make shoes, right, and apparel. So we're a sports brand. So if we came to you today and said, hey, our end goal is to make the best ever marathon running shoe in the world, what we wouldn't do is get all of the people together that we need to make that a success and say, go away and we're going to get a marathon shoe, and then come back and we'll meet in 2 months and see what shoe turns up at the end of that process. You kind of got everybody together at the beginning. I always talk about, if we could kick this off together, have very clear responsibilities, very clear strategy behind what we're doing, a very clear timeline, we're all walking together towards the same goal, then we can make sure we're doing everything we can as a team to make that successful. And I think just putting it in their language of like, hey, this is not something you would ever do in your day-to-day role of just setting an end goal and then going away and hoping that end goal happens. It's a step-by-step partnership through that. Then that's really been, I think, helpful in that kind of aha moment of like, yeah, we all need to be this together in order to make this successful. And if we didn't do everything we could to make them the best possible hire through this process, then probably we won't get that person, right?
Yeah, love that. So sort of just to sort of, I guess, bring the 2 points from both of you together, it's almost make sure we're agreed on the vision of what we're trying to achieve here, but then support the journey with data as you go, and process, of course, as well, so that people are in loop. But you sort of need both of those things, but buy in at both of those things. Let's move on to think about sort of the role of AI. And obviously, AI is at the sort of the tip of everyone's tongue at the moment. So for the last 6 months, it's been certainly in the conversations I've been having with folks, front of mind for everyone. But of course, you've both been running recruitment teams that have been enabled by tech more generally for your whole careers. When you think about sort of technology broadly, what are the areas where you think technology is really well placed to augment those human aspects and to improve those human interactions? Wesley, why don't we kick off with you on this one?
Yeah, I think the key part of what you're saying there is augment, right? So we can find areas where AI can actually add a lot of value throughout the hiring process. What we try to do is look at the kind of lower impact work, the repetitive tasks that we've spoken about already, that we can eliminate through AI or through automation or through these tools. And then also looking at how we can create a tools landscape that provides an even more holistic view of the data that Richard was talking about as well, right? So where we can really leverage AI now is, we work with you in MetaView, we have Gem, we have a kind of a number of other tools that give you a much more holistic view of your process and the work that you're doing and the quality of the assessments that you're doing. So what we try to do is use elements of that to automate and free up our team to then be more strategic and spend more time with the teams they support. But then there's also this element of, hey, this is going to help to give us a ton of more information, more data, collect much more granularity in the background that we can then use to analyze the trends at scale and say, okay, this is where things are maybe going in the wrong direction. This is where we need to focus our time. And everything from spotting where biases exist in your process, looking at maybe where the quality dips between different functions of how they approach interviewing or assessment. This is the areas where I think AI add a lot of value, and they give us the data that we can then translate that data into insights. I wouldn't want an AI coming and telling me necessarily exactly what I need to work on. That's where we come in. But yeah, certainly to give you that visibility and that landscape is huge.
Yeah, love that. Richard?
Yeah, so if you think about hiring at scale and really enhancing the relationship-based recruiting, that's where AI does play an incredible role. So, Wesley really articulated the points perfectly. So I'll just tell a story. What it took back in 1998 to be an excellent recruiter is still the same as it is today in 2023. What I recall was that every time especially in a long-term relationship based recruiting effort, it took a lot of contacts. There was an individual, and this story is not that old actually. This was actually at Facebook when our goal was to really deliver a much better mobile app experience. In 2008, we were still considered a desktop product. And that was also in 2008, Mark Zuckerberg said we're going to be a mobile first company. And we all didn't know, how to do that. iOS has only been around for 2 years, and, Android hadn't yet been launched yet. So I did develop a relationship with the person that was the first PM under Andy Rubin for Android at Google. And it took a better part of over a year to bring him into Facebook. And he only just recently announced his, retirement from Facebook after 10 plus years. But back to the relationship base, what made excellent recruiters was that I was able to contact him, have coffee with Eric every quarter, follow up on his vacations. As he posted on Facebook, because we became Facebook friends. And that enabled the ability to be able to not only convince him to join Facebook, but to walk away from 30% of his salary to be able to, do that. So what Wesley was talking about is that there are a lot of tools like MetaView, especially, and Gem and others, that gives you the opportunity at scale to think about, oh, I should follow up with Sally on this. I should follow up with, George on that. And, or it automatically provides updates, in the background, so that when I'm able to connect with that candidate, we start off like we were just talking, only a month ago. And that is the true basis where I think AI enables relationship-based recruiting. Every time I hear that AI is going to replace recruiters or sourcers, I'm skeptical about that, because I think that is a path to where essentially we treat jobs as transactions versus real career decisions. So that's that's the story to share.
Yeah, 100%. I think that story really resonates. Something that that connection, maybe there's some world in like the movie Her, where they develop a relationship with your company with some automated something automated, but it seems pretty far away, and definitely nothing we're working on at the moment. So one of the things you mentioned, Wesley, was enabling your recruiters to focus on their partnership, so their relationship with the hiring managers they work with, and of course relationships with the candidate. Is that sort of where we're currently thinking we draw the line? Like the owner of that relationship, that remains the humans in your team, but everything to support up to that point, we want it to be as augmented as possible. Is that sort of like a fair line to draw? I won't hold you to it, but that feels comfortable to me.
I'd say yes and no is the answer to that question. I think there is that's the key work that I want to free the teams up to do, right? Yeah. So I think everything from building those meaningful relationships, helping them to prepare for the interviews, helping to really kind of become that functional market expert and that partner to their teams, 100%, right? I don't want them stuck doing the admin side. Where I say no is that I think the risk where the front of the process gets too AI focused is just that, for me, there is still a lot of inherent risk in handing that much of the process over to an AI algorithm. I think there's this kind of, there's all sorts of documentaries out there of these biases that creep into an AI, because ultimately humans are biased, and the data that we feed into them is data sets about humans, and that unfortunately is just going to pick up those biases and run with them. So I would say we need to be super careful about how much of the front end of our process we also hand over to AI, or we automate too much, and that there is still a human element in there. But otherwise, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
It's definitely a helpful cutoff point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good call out, really good insight. Completely concur. And obviously, where we sort of spend most of our time as, or where I spend most of my time as, working at MetaView, is really at that sort of end of the process stage, right? It's the interviews, it is the relationship, almost where the relationship comes to a head is the interview stage, and so that's where we sort of tend to spend most of our time too. Obviously, you've both used MetaView or using MetaView in your organizations where you've led recruiting. How has it played a role in strengthening that hiring process? And I think you both actually had slightly different experiences, so it'd be really cool to sort of hear from both of you on it. Richard, let's go to you first.
Yeah, so Sal, as you know, like when we first spoke, MetaView was still sort of very early on, and which gave us an opportunity to really impact a pain point, an area of concern at Robinhood, which was, how do we create more calibrated interviews quickly? The challenge in front of us was every year we more than doubled our hiring. So in 2019, we hired 400 people, where previous years 250. In 2020, we hired 1,000 people. In 2021, we hired 2,200 people. So every year we needed to calibrate a new set of interviewers, and every year we're behind because it's humanly impossible to double every year, just based on the simple math of how many qualified people you have inside. So I think what MetaView did brilliantly was the ability for us to take a super calibrated interview and allow us to federate a interview onboarding program in such a way where we can rapidly bring on board more and more engineering interviewers. Those are the hardest ones, especially during times where engineering interviewing was taxed. This is during university season, where everyone's pulling double, triple duty. Now, with that said, what I was super excited about, and it just happened to have been a moment in time that was pretty defining, where we went from very little virtual interviewing to 100% virtual interviewing. And what I was super excited about is now it opened up the possibility for MetaView to play a role to ensuring that we've got not only highly calibrated interviewers, but we are conducting them in a way where we're producing much better results. And the data behind it was just incredibly exciting and brilliant. And so I will say MetaView helped us to more than double our hiring output for engineering specifically. But I think what the opportunity that's ahead of Robinhood is MetaView can play a role to ensure that as interviews are being conducted, that it's done in an efficient and an effective way. And that's something I'm super excited about for Robinhood long term.
Yeah, love that. And that's one of the reasons we're so passionate about this topic, is exactly because there's so much that people involved in hiring, whether it's recruiters, hiring managers, interviews, do around hiring that isn't the conversation. It is the sort of, it actually reduces the humanity in some ways when you sort of have to be super structured about your conversation and write down everything they say and all these things. If the sooner we can ship those things out, the more we can actually focus on the things that a robot can't do, to use Wesley's phrase. Wesley, what about you? What's been, tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of what Richard said. It's helped us to bring on big fresh tranches of new interviewers and get them up to speed quickly. And I think a couple of things that it's helped us to do additionally is just the ability to have this ongoing coaching, because you do these one-off training programs, at a lot of companies, and we try and teach people on the bias, and you try and really embed them into our specific hiring philosophy and the way that we think in terms of how they should look at. We're very human-centric in terms of our recruitment style. So our coaching is a lot around how can you get to know somebody, how can you really understand what makes them tick, how they think, because it's as important how they work and how they solve problems as to what they can do within our organization. So we try and focus on those pieces. And then you teach someone the fundamentals, and then you kind of let them loose into the wild, was kind of the historic way, and just hope and pray that everything you've told them is sunk in and that they do that work. And so not only being able to rely on MetaView to then give them the in the moment feedback and nudges of like, hey, this is a little bit off, or like, hey, this could be better, but this is the things you can tweak. That's not something that physically you could replicate any other way, because you cannot have recruiters listening in on every interview happening in your company. So this is really massive. And then I think more with kind of where MetaView is going, and the work we've been doing together, so on kind of further developing out more of that aggregated data level view of these are the sorts of red flags that might be popping up here and there, and this is where you want to spend your time. It helps us as a recruiting function, rather than trying to just continuously say, hey, come do a refresher every 12 months or whatever it may be. We can actually spend the time to identify, this is the specific 3 or 4 problems that we have in the organization. Let's build a completely different one-off training that we take people through that tackles just that topic. Or let's spend a day in a room with these engineering leaders because they're struggling with X, Y, Z, and we can just kind of help get them back on track. So it helps you to both kind of zoom in and have that continuous feedback, but then also take that much higher look from a further out lens and look at where you need to spend your time, which is invaluable because we can't spend our time everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah. I've it's obviously like something we think about a lot, but heard someone else speaking about sort of one of the big values is there's like the surface area of problems you could be solving is so large. In fact, it's so much larger than any objective, sort of any list of objectives you have is sort of inherently like just the tip of the iceberg. And actually one of the things that tools like MetaView can help with is help you identify actually what are the problems that should be bubbling up to the surface, because we don't necessarily have measurement of everything right now. And so the more of the things you can measure, the more you know, actually, this is where we need to be spending our sort of like human creative judgment, not necessarily on these other things. So yeah, I think that sort of that resonates a lot. Last question, and then we'll jump over 2 questions from folks in the audience. I guess given the advancements in AI recently, what skills do you think will increasingly be important for recruiting teams to focus on in the coming years? So Wesley, you obviously talked about don't do things that are robot-like, but what are the things that aren't robot-like that people should be spending their time on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about already is just about, the sorts of things you can plug in. There's already tools that will start to do that, and that this is just going to get exponentially more and more impressive over time. So you have to think about the ways to elevate your role. I touched on obviously with sourcing, how you can start to think more holistically around that channel strategy, right? And how your company shows up and how you need to do the things you need to do. I think as an individual recruiting organization, whether it's thinking about the ways that you can reach more underrepresented groups and start to kind of focus in on what's the type of assessment that we're doing, how well are we doing it, does it solve the problems, are we actually bringing people in? You can kind of take the time to spend time analyzing all the data that you have across these systems, even as a recruiter, and start to think through much longer term strategies. So you're, instead of just thinking now, okay, I've got to hire this role, and that's kind of the focus of your day to day, you could be instead spending a lot more time building longer term strategies of what's the succession plan looking like for our organization, where's the org growth going, like what do we need right now, looking at your team and partnering with you to understand what are the skills gaps within the organization. So it's all of these much more longer term impactful thinking. You can start to run analysis on the quality of hire by looking at, how did they perform in their performance reviews over the last 3 to 5 years, and what does that mean for the types of questions we've asked, or how well are our scorecards actually allowing us to rate people as top performers. There's all these much more interesting topics that normally you just don't have the time to get to, because all you're focused on is getting from A to B, and all the best ways that you can do that. Then your role becomes, as I said, much more longer term, much more strategic, much more impactful, and hopefully you can help shape the future of a great organization, rather than just, hey, I did a really great job with my KPIs, or I did a really great job hiring the roles that I had on my plate this year. You're elevating that. You're doing so much more.
Yeah. To echo what Wesley's saying, it's like, here's what robots can do that's better than you. It can infer keywords and infer a particular job really quickly. And they're getting smarter, right? Like you can just use those keywords and think about career progressions and try to infer what that sort of next job could be. But what robots can't do that humans can do better is to find out who within your candidate pipeline that you've been investing a lot of time in is ready for that next step, is the up and comer. That person may not have the traditional background, but they are doing so well at their current company. And unfortunately, they're not getting the opportunity to get to that next level, but they're so anxious to want to go do that. Who within their within their network are they known to be a particular specialist in an upcoming area? I remember not that long ago when data science was not a commoditized role; it was a new role. Back in 2008, when we at Facebook were trying to get as many of them as possible, and we were realizing that this is just a budding area of expertise, and humans had a much better way to understand and infer which background is best suited for that, and that's really where Wesley's comment really comes into place. What will differentiate you as a TA professional are really those elements, and it behooves you to go deep into any particular talent vertical, and for you to understand deeply who are the up and comers, what are the budding talent areas of expertise. Who do you know within your network that has access to the best and brightest? Who are the best and brightest? And how do you cultivate a relationship long-term with them? And that's what's going to differentiate you from a robot.
Yeah, super well said. Right, we've got about 7 minutes left. Thanks so much for the thoughts so far. Let's go to a couple of questions that we've had in. Stephanie, what's top of mind?
Sure. So the first question is, what is one thing that you or folks on your team are doing today that you don't think you'll be doing in 5 years in light of everything that we've kind of just discussed?
Wesley, the first thing that comes to mind are spreadsheets to keep track of who to follow up with. And, those things, I think also coming up with, handcrafted data on the fly, because of tools like, MetaView comes with such a rich set of data and allows you to be more sophisticated. What are some things that come to mind for you, Wesley?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you need to be, what I think can kind of get automated pretty quickly is this kind of initial market analysis. So when we talk about kind of having to spend a lot of time mapping out where talent sits in the market, I think this is the type of stuff that AI can give you a picture of that, and then it will be up to you to kind of take that picture and build on it. Something that our team spend a lot of time already on is coaching the hiring manager on things like, hey, how your JDs are non-inclusive and all of these pieces. I think, you've already seen things like ChatGPT are able to put together pretty amazing job descriptions and and help you to kind of put together really interesting copy. I mean, that has its risky side. I think we were just having a discussion the other day about how difficult it's going to be to spot a really good resume or cover letter these days, given that it could easily have been written by ChatGPT, and how we'll have to kind of keep our eye out for people that are also typing our job descriptions into ChatGPT and asking it to come up with questions that we might ask in the interview, so they get kind of an unfair leg up on prep and the possible things that might come up. So we're having to constantly check these things and see, okay, does that actually mean that we're asking the too obvious questions, because people can just kind of cheat these ways. So it's an interesting one, but I think that there's a lot of, to your point, Richard, the kind of data gathering, there's a lot of these pieces that I hope we won't have to worry about so much more. And again, I think anything that's repetitive data collection, focused on gathering information, hopefully that can all be presented to us, and then we can take that information and do something really meaningful with it.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, I completely agree with the idea that things are repetitive and predictable. I think one thing that's changed recently is maybe more things that we didn't realize were repetitive and predictable actually are repetitive and predictable. So now we have opened up a whole new world of things. And I think that sort of relates actually to what you were saying there, Richard, around data gathering. So we think about that a bunch as well, both from interview data, but also with our recent AI-generated notes. What is AI-generated interview summaries? They are taking a really relatively dense, large set of information and attempting to summarize it to the things that matter for the audience. And that's something that people spend a bunch of time doing in their day-to-day manually and across various parts of our working lives, that I think will increasingly go away, because bringing in those, whether it's disparate data sources or just really large data sets, and summarizing it to its essence will become less of a sort of a skill that you need to learn, and more of something that, you're just augmented by.
Nice. Cool. The next question is, what impact, if any, do you think that the current market conditions and market slowdown has on the importance of relationship-based recruiting?
Yeah, it's a tough
Oh
one.
yeah, go for
No,
it.
go ahead, Richard. Yeah.
No, please start.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think what it does mean is that because you're hiring a little bit less in a lot of companies, you have a little bit more breathing space to focus on relationship-based recruiting, which is great. So you can utilize that opportunity to really making sure that you're out there building relationships and connecting and starting to kind of do that deeper understanding of what makes people tick. I hope it's just a short-term piece, and we're just kind of using this to build the foundations so that when things do ramp back up, we're in a great place, because we know the markets, we know the people. We've really started to build those connections. But it's a super difficult one. How about for you, Richard?
Yeah, look, I've been through I want to say 3.5 of these recessions and rebounds, and a lot of what I've been talking about, and whether it's podcasts or writing on blogs or whatever, is this sort of notion of a rebound and how companies are underprepared. So here's some sort of common trends that I've noticed. And I went through the dot-com bubble burst in the Valley. We actually had, in 1998, we had a Asian financial market crisis that impacted the tech market in the Valley, and then the subprime mortgage crisis, the coronavirus crises, and then now where we're at right now. So I guess it's 3.5 of those situations. What I found always interesting is when you reached out to candidates in this perceived notion of a candidate-rich market, like there's lots of candidates that are highly qualified already, that more often than not, they were skeptical, especially with companies that are startups or not yet established brands. If you're not part of the Fortune 10 companies, then it was really hard for you to get candidates to respond to your reach outs. And I always found out that ironic, because these are folks that just got laid off, and why wouldn't they jump at the first chance of hearing from any company? And it turned out that the trust that was broken at a company that they spent many years thinking that that's a company that they were going to retire at, or at least spend 5-10 years at, and then they were laid off, or their friends were laid off. It really heightens their skepticism of most companies outside of 2 or 3 that they felt were companies that they respected. And so it put a lot of onus on recruiting professionals to elevate their relationship-based game so that they can talk about why the future of companies like Facebook at the time was considered a MySpace competitor, which had 0 plans to have any profitability. And I'm trying to convince people to take massive pay cuts to join this company during the longest recession, the Great Recession. And it took a lot of art and relationship-based approach to be able to convince people to go there. So, I actually think that in today's market, it's really going to test your ability to sharpen those relationship-based skills. It's really going to test your ability to be able to bring in the best candidates. And counterintuitively, it'll take longer for you to hire the best. It won't take longer for you to hire a body, but it'll take longer to hire the best person.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Richard. And I see that lack of trust also quite heavily in talent from underrepresented groups, because they've had so many companies saying the same stuff, and everyone's kind of making the same claims, and our environment's super inclusive, and this is a great place to be. And I think to your point, the relationship and long-term building allows you to prove over time that you're walking the talk. You can demonstrate, hey, look, this is what we're doing that is different. This is the inclusive environment that we offer. This is how you may align to our values and the working environment we've created. So I agree also in terms of increasing diversity there. That time and that effort invested to show people that you're authentic is huge.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, not something I thought about, how the sort of the broader environment actually means that those human to human interactions you're having are all the more important because of all this other context that people have going on in their life that you're not going to sort of understand unless you have that sort of depth of relationship or like a high quality conversation. Yeah, super, super thoughtful. Awesome. So I think we're about time. So learned a ton. Richard, Wesley, thanks so much for your time. Pretty early morning for you, Richard, pretty late in the evening for you, Wesley. So yeah, thanks both for the flexibility to find a time that works for everyone. Also, thanks to the guests, of course, for your questions and for listening in. We really appreciate any feedback. So if you do want to drop us a note after and sort of let us know how you thought it went or any recommendations on other folks we should be speaking to on this or similar topics, then please do get in touch. So yeah, everyone, thanks so much. And here's to amazing interviewing. Thank you.